Hello, I am Jordan, and this month, the month of July, I will be doing a read along of Never Call Retreat by Bruce Catton, and I will be doing this with the one and only Steve Donahue. He should be putting up his own video um, of the first portion of this book at some point later today, hopefully. I think that was kind of the plan, although, as I understand it, his house, Hyde Cottage, is just being decimated right now under reconstruction, which is kind of appropriate given the reading material. But hopefully he'll be posting his own video soon. I am going to talk today about the first couple chapters. I'm assuming that a few of you are going to be reading along with us. I've received some comments to that effect. Um, and I'm also assuming that the vast majority of my viewers are not going to be joining me for this, which is totally fine. I'll just say quickly that I think you're missing out. Bruce Catton is a fantastic writer, and I'll be getting to that. But Never Call Retreat is the final book in a trilogy, Bruce Catton's trilogy, commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the Civil War, as I understand it. I have not read the previous two books in this trilogy, and I have not yet read. This is my first time reading Never Call Retreat. Um, I've been assured by both Steve and by the introduction to this book that the book can stand alone, and so far that's absolutely true. The first two chapters of this book are kind of like returning to a friend that I really enjoy. I've only read one of Catton's books previously, This Hallowed Ground, which is kind of a general overall history of the Civil War from the Union perspective. One thing that I'm enjoying about this book is it's a little more balanced. We're getting a lot from the side of the Confederacy as well. But this is beginning at a very crucial point in the war, obviously. So this book picks up shortly after the Emancipation Proclamation, and most importantly, shortly after the removal of General McClellan from the Army of the Potomac. And as a result, one of the very first incidents described in this book is the Battle at Fredericksburg, which was a crushing Union defeat of just catastrophic proportions. And it happened as soon as General McClellan was removed from command and replaced by Burnside in charge of the Army of the Potomac. I am not at all an expert on anything Civil War related. I have a very basic knowledge of the way things went down. But as I understand it, I tend to the opinion that McClellan gets a bit of a bad rap. He is kind of a very, very maligned figure in Civil War history, and I think there is certainly some justification for that. But overall, my interpretation of him is as a man who was hesitant to subject the people under his control to the meat grinder that was the Civil War. I think he had cold feet about that, and understandably so. Furthermore, as Bruce Catton points out in no uncertain terms in this book, he was the core personality in the military side of the Union conflict, right? I think that now, removed to our present day, we think of Grant as more defining of the Union side of this conflict. But certainly, at least in the Army of the Potomac, McClellan was kind of always the guiding light and the charismatic soul of that army. And removing him, as Catton describes a little later on in this book, caused some serious morale issues and some serious chain of command conflict. But anyways, the book starts with Fredericksburg, and I'm going to read a quick passage describing it to give you a sense of the way Catton writes, because it really is, it reads like beautiful fiction. So it says, Fredericksburg was a strange and terrible battle, fought on a frozen plain between bleak hills in a ruined town. A battle that began in wintry sunlight and ended with mist floating up from the river to cloak many hundreds of bodies that lay in fields and leafless thickets, and its meaning was veiled. All of the material strength the mighty republic could bring to the battlefield had been displayed here. The soldiers had fought as well as ever. What made the battle so tragic, to Northern eyes, was that heroism and endurance had been so prodigally displayed and so miserably wasted. That strange and inexplicable quality which Mr. Lincoln later called the last full measure of devotion was still there, but Fredericksburg proved that by itself this was not enough. Um, and I think that that gets kind of at the heart of the general tone of the first few chapters of this book, which is that the war was becoming for both sides something that it was not intended to be at the beginning. The South was digging its heels into a mode of existence that was not only morally reprehensible, but no longer feasible in any way. And the North had committed itself via the Emancipation Proclamation to an aspect of the war that many Northerners, perhaps the majority of Northerners, did not intend when they first set out to preserve the Union, which was, after all, um, the justification for the war on the Union end for the vast majority of Americans. Um, Even for Lincoln, who we now tend to look back on as this figure who had certain strong moral convictions that he was willing to um, pursue to the very end. I don't think that that's an accurate depiction of Lincoln. Certainly, he was an astonishingly brilliant person, but he was also kind of he did a lot of waffling, and I think that his critics at the time tended to point that out and tended to use it against him. He changed his mind quite frequently, and I think he made almost single-handedly turned the war into a war for the emancipation of the slaves, which is really the only justification for the war that I think really bears scrutiny. Preserving the Union is an ideological castle in the sky, in my opinion. What the war really had to be about was the emancipation of slavery. And I think that Lincoln, to a certain extent, knew that intuitively, but he used the emancipation of the slaves as a military tactic. Catton is very adamant in pointing that out. However, it became something greater than was its original intention, and that's kind of one of the fascinating things about the war. And I think Catton brings it to the foreground very beautifully in these first couple chapters, which is that the war became something bigger than any of its parts, than any of its political machinations or military drama. And I'm going to read another quick passage that I think kind of sums up that idea quite well. If I can get it here, sorry. He says the determination to restore the Union at any cost had been originally, and for most Northerners, a determination to restore a cherished past. The average Northerner wanted to be let alone so that he could enjoy things as they used to be. Now he was beginning to see that things would never again, not this side of the Jordan, be as they used to be. Instead of restoring the past, the war was destroying it. So Catton does a great job of portraying the way that this war is becoming its own entity with its own kind of historical implications that were broader than had originally been dreamt of. And I think that that's, like I said, perhaps the most interesting part about these years in American history was that something seemed to have taken place that nobody seemed to fully grasp at the time, and that nobody in power seemed to 100% commit themselves to. Certainly there were very vehement abolitionists, but they were not in power. And one of the great things that Catton displays in this book was the way that Lincoln, who was technically a moderate, somehow ended up aligning himself with this, what was at the time, radical abolitionist agenda. And how, as a result, he alienated members of his own party, and he certainly alienated members of the Democratic Party, which was the party for slavery, for lack of a better summary at the time. So there's a lot about the political machinations, which are fascinating in themselves, because Lincoln is such a fascinating figure, and because it was such a tumultuous time period in politics, as well as social life and militarily speaking. But the core of the book is, of course, in military history, which I think is interesting in its own way, but I don't think that military history is innately interesting unless you have a couple of things. Number one, you have to have a good writer, which Catton certainly is, and hopefully the passages that I read demonstrate that. But you also have to have a sense that the war being fought is greater than just a series of dramatic moments, although the Civil War certainly was that. And I feel like this particular war was that. Like I said, like I was saying, and like Catton is pointing out, it became something much bigger, even than its casualty lists would suggest. It became a battle for what the country was and what the country was going to be going forward. Um, so, anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on these first couple chapters. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to add. I've already been going for over 10 minutes. But, anyways, I hope those of you who are joining us are enjoying the book so far. I do think that I'm hoping to get more about the kind of the bigger personalities in the war. So far, the emphasis has been mostly on Lincoln and a couple of commanders in the army, but nothing. One of the reasons I'm attracted to this time period in history is because the figures have taken on such a mythical status, and because they're such large personalities. Something about this time period brought that out in people, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more of that going forward. But let me know what you're thinking of the book so far, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching. Have a good day.